Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everybody. Is this really loud to you guys? Okay. Yeah. So if we could lower the volume a little bit, please. So hopefully we'll bring this down a little bit. My name is Craig Rory. I am a training officer with Region 3 in Philadelphia. And just a little bit about myself. I've been with FSA for 25 years. So I do a lot of training. Glad to be here today. And we're going to talk about add drops and withdrawals. Just a little bit more background about myself. I had 6 adult children. They've all gone to post-secondary education in various capacities. 4-year public, community college, vocational. So did FAFSAs for 10 years. I appreciate what you guys do from a professional and from a personal standpoint. And the best thing is I love my kids. All 6 are out of the house. They're employed. They're not allowed back in. It's just me, my wife, and the dog now. We're going to talk about add drops and withdrawals. And this is our agenda. We'll talk about federal Pell Grant recalculation, give you an overview of that. Talk about administering federal Pell recalculations for modules. Adds, drops, and direct loans, how that's affected. Withdrawal definitions and some overview of that. How this withdrawals affect schools required to take attendance, and also the rules with schools not required to take attendance. And then some enrollment reporting reminders. And then at the conclusion of that, I'll take any questions you guys have. So, with Pell Grants, obviously there are mandatory recalculations for Pell Grants. It has to be recalculated if a student's EFC changes. It needs to reflect the enrollment status between terms. A student needs to start the credits for which Pell is paid. So if a student does not start all the credits for which Pell is paid, then you have to perform a mandatory recalculation and pay based upon the credits that the student actually began attendance in. And that's in the regs in CFR 690-80. Schools can have an optional Pell recalculation, so you can establish a date for which you're going to look at students' enrollment, whether they add or drop courses, and finalize their enrollment status for awarding Pell for that. Schools, there's a lot of different names for that. It's a census date, a freeze date, and an add drop date. For our purposes, we're going to call it a Pell recalculation date in this session. So your options, you don't have to have a Pell recalculation policy. You can have a policy to recalculate Pell for every course add or drop occurrence that occurs in a term. A policy to recalculate based on enrollment status on a single fixed date, and also a policy to recalculate to account for enrollment changes in modules within a term. So if you don't establish a Pell recalculation policy within a term, a student who begins attendance in all classes would be paid on the initial calculation, even if that student's enrollment status changed before the disbursement was made. And it's based, again, on the initial calculation, which is the first calculation that's made on or after the date that you receive an ICER or you receive a department-produced document with an official expected family contribution. So the 3 components of that initial calculation is you're going to have an ICER with an ed-produced EFC, a documented or projected enrollment status, and you're going to calculate an award. So we'll give you just a little example here of what happens if there isn't a Pell recalculation policy. We're going to use Hometown Community College. You will be sick of Hometown Community College by the end of this session because you're going to hear about them a lot. So we have Deborah. She gets her Pell eligible ICER comes into Hometown on August 6th. They provide an initial calculation. She's scheduled to begin attendance as a full-time student at the start of the term on August 15th. She begins as a full-time student, but then she drops to 3 credit hours on August 20th. She's still going to receive full-time Pell because since the school has no Pell recalculation policy, you're going to use the initial calculation. And next we have Margaret. Margaret also, her ICER comes in, Pell eligible ICER on August 6th. She's currently scheduled to begin as a half-time student on August 15th. Just before her classes start, Margaret adds 2 classes. She's enrolled full-time on August 15th, but because the school has no Pell recalculation policy, they're required to use the initial calculation, and Margaret is awarded Pell at the half-time status. So not having a Pell recalculation policy kind of worked for Deborah, doesn't work so well for Margaret. We have Hometown Community College again. We have Kevin. He submits his 1920 ICER on August 3rd, 2019. He provides an initial calculation. He's projected to begin attendance as a full-time student at the start of the next award year on August 15th, 2020. He does not begin attendance in 2 classes and is considered half-time at the term start. Here, Pell has to be recalculated at half-time because Kevin isn't eligible for full-term Pell because he didn't start all of the classes in which his Pell was awarded. So in this case, even though there's no Pell recalculation policy, it's a mandatory recalculation. Now we have Hometown. They've switched things up here. Now they have a Pell recalculation policy. Their term starts on August 15th, 2019. Their recalculation date is August 30th, 2019. So we have Sarah. She begins attendance on the 15th with 6 credit hours. She adds an additional course of 3 credit hours. So her enrollment status for Pell purposes as of the Pell recalculation date is 9 hours because she added those 3 hours before the Pell recalculation date. Here we have Rick. He begins attendance on August 15th. For 12 credit hours, he drops 2 courses and 6 credit hours on August 25th. So his enrollment purposes for Pell at the Pell recalculation date is 6 credit hours. So that he's going to get half-time Pell. Here we have Estelle. She begins on August 5th with 6 credit hours. She adds an additional course, 3 credit hours on September 1st. But her enrollment status for Pell is going to be, for Title IV purposes, is 6 credit hours because she added those 3 additional hours after the Pell recalculation date. We have Joshua. He begins attending on August 15th of 12 credit hours. He drops 2 courses for a total of 6 credit hours on September 1st. His enrollment status is going to be 12 credit hours because Joshua, probably a second-year student who's a little savvy, decided to drop his 6 credit hours after the Pell recalculation date. With withdrawals prior to Pell recalculation date, how you're going to determine eligibility, you're going to look at the enrollment status that's established on the earliest date of either the withdrawal or the Pell recalculation date. So if the student withdraws prior to your Pell recalculation date, you're going to use that enrollment status that the student established at the time of withdrawal when calculating and looking at their Pell eligibility. If they add a course after the Pell recalculation date and then withdrawal, you're going to use the enrollment status established by the student as of the time of the Pell recalculation date. So we have Hometown Community College. We have Zachary. Zach begins with 6 credit hours on August 15th. Withdrawals on August 22nd. His enrollment status at the time is 6 credit hours. So that's what would be his Pell eligibility status. We have Natasha, but she begins on August 15th with 6 credit hours. She drops 3 credit hours on August 20th. She finally redrops the final remaining 3 credit hours. So she's going to withdraw completely on August 25th. So her enrollment status is going to be 3 credit hours because that's what she is at the time she withdraws. Next, we have Amber. She begins on August 15th with 6 credit hours. She adds 2 courses for 6 additional credit hours on September 1st. She drops all courses on October 15th. And Amber's enrollment status for Pell is going to be 6 credit hours. So that's where she was at the Pell recalculation date. Next, we have programs that are offered in modules. If the student initially enrolls after the Pell recalculation date, the school must use enrollment status from the latter of the Pell recalculation date or when the school is able to perform an initial Pell calculation. Typically, in this case, the Pell recalculation or calculation, initial Pell would not take place until the student enrolled, which was in this case going to be after the Pell recalculation date. So here we have Hometown Community College again. We have Paul. He does not register or begin at the start of the term. On September 15th, he decides he wants to enroll in 2 modules, 6 credit hours that start on October 1st. Now, that is after the Pell recalculation date, but Paul begins his attendance in his modules. His enrollment status is going to be 6 credit hours because that's when his initial calculation was done, and it was after the Pell recalculation date. Here we have John. He begins attendance on August 15th with 6 credit hours. He decides to enroll in a module of 3 credits on October 1st, which is the start date of the module. But because he's going to enroll in that module after the Pell recalculation date, his enrollment status for Title IV purposes is going to be 6 credit hours. We also have, there's a scenario when you have a student and you receive their initial ICER after the Pell recalculation date. So it's later in the payment period, you receive that official ICER, you're going to use the enrollment status from the later of the Pell recalculation date or when the school is able to perform the Pell calculation. So in this case, the initial Pell calculation could not have been done until you received the initial ICER with an official EFC. And in this case, it's going to be after the Pell recalculation date. So we have David. He begins as a full-time student in 12 credit hours. He didn't fill out a FAFSA, so he's not going to get Title IV aid. He decides on September 4th. He completes a FAFSA on the web. On September 6th, the school receives it. At that time, they do the initial Pell calculation, and David's enrolled at 12 credit hours at the time, so that's going to be his enrollment status for Pell, is 12 credit hours. Here we have Bruce. He's a full-time student with 12 credit hours. He didn't also fill out a FAFSA. He does on September 10th. He drops a three credit course. On September 15th, he fills out his FAFSA. You receive it on the 17th, or the school does. At the time they do the initial calculation, Bruce is enrolled in 9 credit hours, so that's going to be his enrollment status for Pell purposes. Next, it gets, obviously modules are a big thing, and you also can have Pell recalculation dates for modules. So you can assign a potential Pell recalculation date for a module, each module within the term. That would be only activated if the student begins attendance in the associated module. If the student does not begin attendance in that associated module or is not enrolled in it, you're going to use the latest active Pell recalculation date to determine their status. When a Pell recalculation date is activated, all courses within the payment period are considered when determining the enrollment status. So here we have Hometown Community College. Their term runs from August 15th to December 14th. They have full-time courses that run the entire term, and then they have Module 1 from August 15th to October 16th, and Module 2 from October 17th through December 14th. So we have Joanne. She's scheduled to attend 6 credits in the full-time course and 3 credits in Module 1 and 3 credits in Module 2. She drops a full-time course of 3 credits on September 10th and the Module 2 course of 3 credits on October 20th. So she began attendance in the Module 2 course. Because she began attendance in that, we're going to use October 24th as the Pell recalculation date, the one for Module 2, and her enrollment status for Pell is going to be 6 credit hours. Next, we have Mark. He's scheduled to attend at 6 credit hours for the full term. So he's got 2 courses for the full term classes, 3 credits in Module 1 and 3 credits in Module 2. He drops the full-time course credits on September 10th. never begins attendance in Module 2. So since he did not begin attendance in Module 2, September 5th is going to be the Pell recalculation date we use. So his enrollment status for Pell will be 9 credit hours. And if that's not fun enough, then we're going to talk about adds, drops, and direct loans. So a Pell recalculation date or census dates really don't have a relevance when determining enrollment status for direct loans. For direct loans, you're going to determine the eligibility at the time of the disbursement. So an otherwise eligible student must be enrolled at least half-time at the time of the disbursement. To ultimately be eligible for direct loan, the student has to have been enrolled half-time at the time of the disbursement and started at least one class. It's important to have a process to confirm that the enrollment status prior to disbursement. So for early disbursements, if you're a school and you disperse direct loan funds up to 10 days prior to enrollment, and the student is scheduled to attend at least half-time prior to disbursement, if the student begins at less than half-time, they're going to still be eligible because they were scheduled as at least half-time. So subsequent disbursements in this case within the term cannot be made unless the student maintains or reestablishes half-time status. And they're going to just, if you make that and they're below half-time, they're just going to repay the loans in accordance with the terms of the promissory note, unless you're required to return funds because it's a R2T4. If a student does not begin attendance in any classes, then the school has to return the direct loan funds credited to the student's account. Any remaining loan funds that were dispersed directly to the student, you're going to notify the appropriate loan servicer. So they're outstanding, and that servicer on the part of the department will issue a 30-day demand letter to the student. Next, we have withdrawal dates. And withdrawals and withdrawal dates. And when we look at top compliance issues, getting the withdrawal date and problems with that in R2T4 is always one of the top compliance issues that we see in the department. So a student is considered withdrawn if in case of a program that's measured in credit hours, it's if the student does not complete all the days in the payment period or in period of enrollment that the student was scheduled to complete. In a program that measures in clock hours, if the student does not complete all the clock hours and weeks of instructional time in the payment period or in period of enrollment, then they're considered withdrawn. In the case of non-term or non-standard term programs, if the student's not scheduled to begin another course within the payment period or the period of enrollment for more than 45 calendar days after the end of the module, the student ceased attending, then they're going to be considered withdrawn unless they are on approved leave of absence. So if a student ceases attendance, drops or withdraws all their Title IV eligible courses in the payment period or in period of enrollment, then the student is considered a withdrawal for Title IV purposes, even if the student is still in school and enrolled in non-Title IV courses. And the goal of the return of Title IV provisions is to identify the date that most accurately reflects the point where the student ceases academic attendance, not the date that's going to maximize the federal aid to the institution or to the student. Usually we don't have to say that. I've had a few schools that go, well, that will say we're trying to maximize their aid, and that's good, but you have to follow the regs. So that can't be your goal. So we look at withdrawal dates differently for schools that are required to take attendance and schools that are not required to take attendance. We consider a school is required to take attendance if there's an outside entity that requires attendance to be taken, if the school has its own requirement that instructors take attendance, if there's an outside entity or institution that has a requirement that can only be met by taking attendance, and attendance can be for an entire institution, it can be for a department, or it can be for a program. So if you have one program that's required to take attendance and one that's not, you're going to treat those two differently when it comes to withdrawal dates. If you're required to take attendance for that program, they must use its official attendance records to determine the withdrawal date. and the last date of attendance must be the withdrawal date. For schools that are not required to take attendance, you're not required to take attendance by an outside entity, and you have no formal policy to take attendance. That's traditionally most credit hour schools. The official withdrawal then is going to be the date the student began the official withdrawal process, or the date the student otherwise notified or made official notice to a designated school official in their official capacity, either in writing or orally. The school has to document if it's an oral notification that the student's going to leave. And if it's both dates are triggered, then you're going to use the earlier date as the withdrawal date. For special circumstances, if it's a withdrawal because of circumstances beyond the student's with control, it can be the date of the circumstances, such if it's an accident or an illness, or there's some sort of loss, something that is sudden that causes them to leave school. It could be later if the student continues attendance despite the circumstances, but then later withdraws. And this also applies to administrative withdrawals. If you expel, suspend, or cancel registration, the withdrawal date is the date the school would terminate the enrollment of that student. This is always a cherry one to talk about. In the unfortunate case when a student dies, you're going to use the guidance under 6822 C14. The withdrawal date is determined by the institution when the circumstances occurred that caused the student's death. It can be no later than the date of the student's death unless the student withdrew previously due to other circumstances. For withdrawals without notification, the withdrawal date can be the midpoint of the payment period or the period of enrollment. You can always use that. You can also use the last academically related activity. So you can document, if you can document attendance at an academically related activity in lieu of the withdrawal date, you can use that. The student cannot certify this, but you can. You have to document the activity. You have to make sure that it's academic or academically related, and that the student was attended that activity. Some of the things academically related activities are but aren't limited to physically attending class, obviously, where there's an opportunity for direct interaction, submitting an academic assignment, taking an exam, completing an interactive tutorial, or participating in computer-assisted instruction. And again, we're pretty clear it's actually completing the tutorial or participating in the computer-assisted instruction, just not logging on and sleeping during the computer-assisted instruction. Attending a study group that's assigned by the school, participating in an online discussion about academic matters, initiating contact with a faculty member to ask the question about an academic subject or in the course, that is also considered academically related activity. Academic related activities do not include living in institutional housing. I always think this one, my one roommate in college, I think this is his rule. Second semester, he was going to flunk out, and he knew he was going to flunk out about halfway in, so he just lived in the dorm with me and went and ate and partied because his father was a brigadier general in the Marine Corps, and he knew that life was going to change when he went home. So just living in institutional housing, participating in the school's meal plan, logging on to an online class without active participation, or participating in general academic counseling or advisement, we do not consider those to be an academically related activity. If a student begins attendance and has not officially withdrawn and fails to earn a passing grade in at least one course offered over the entire period, you have to assume for Title IV purposes that the student has withdrawn unless you can document that the student completed that period. So kind of the idea, they have to earn their F, so to speak. So, if they failed everything and they were there to the very end and took an exam, then they completed. The date of determination is also very important when it comes to withdrawals and with return of Title IV funds. The date of determination is the date that you become aware that the student ceased attendance. For a student who provides no notification of withdrawal, the date of determination is the latter of the student's withdrawal date or the date of the notice of official withdrawal. For unofficial withdrawals, if attendance required, it cannot be more than 14 calendar days, that date of determination, after the last date of attendance. If attendance is not required, then it's going to be within 30 calendar days from the earlier of the end of the payment period or in period of enrollment, end of the academic year, or the end of the student's educational program. And the reason these are so important is there are deadlines. There are certain things that you're required to do that are triggered off these dates. You have 30 days from the date of determination to perform a return of Title IV calculation, notify the student of a grant overpayment, and notify the student they're eligible for a post-withdrawal disbursement of a Title IV loan and request confirmation that they want that loan. 45 days from the date of determination, you have to return student the funds, funds to, you can do it sooner, but no later than 45 days. Make a post-withdrawal disbursement of title grant funds directly to the student. Again, you can do it earlier, but no later than, and we'd like you to do it earlier, but no later than 45 days from the date of determination. The school has 180 days from the date of determination to make a post-withdrawal disbursement of Title IV grant funds as a credit to the student's account, and make a post-withdrawal disbursement of title loan funds to the student. You have up to 180 days. You have to receive confirmation from the student or a parent in the case of a PLUS loan that they want that disbursement before you can make it. When it comes to a grant, you don't have to. You can just disperse it. But when it comes to a Title IV fund, a Title IV loan, you have to get confirmation. And then lastly, we have enrollment reporting reminders. And again, this is a big thing we see in compliance, is enrollment reporting not being done correctly or on time. So just want to remind you, you're required to schedule a roster from NSLDS at a minimum of every 60 days. You have to certify enrollment within 15 days of the roster being sent to NSLDS or by NSLDS, excuse me. If the response is provided by batch file, NSLDS is going to process an error acknowledgement file, and errors must be corrected within 10 days of that. And these are the enrollment status codes that you're going to use. For late enrollment reporting, a late reporting notification is sent to the school on the 22nd day if no updates are sent. After the roster is sent, it's sent to the enrollment reporting contact, the primary contact, and the CEO or campus president are also copied. Schools that fail to comply with enrollment reporting requirements can lose Title IV eligibility, and they can also be imposed fines. So for those schools that are egregious in this, that is certainly what can happen. Your resources for Pell calculations, it's Volume 3, Chapter 3. For direct loans, Volume 4, Chapter 2. And Volume 5, Chapters 1 and 2 talks about withdrawals. And in the regs for Pell calculations is 6.890.80. For students who do not begin attendance, it's in 6.681.21. Notification of withdrawal, we cover that in 6.6.822C, and date of determination is 6.6.822I3I. Lastly, just to give you a little more, if you have any questions about this sessions, you can send it to askafed@ed.gov, or you can run over and ask us at AskAFed. We're here all week. And if you have operational questions, you can send that to codsupport@ed.gov. And with that, the floor is open for any questions you might have. If you have questions, I ask that you please step up to the mic, and I'll be glad to entertain your questions. That's the only entertaining I'll do, is your questions, actually.
Good afternoon. Excuse me, my name is Ben Dobner with the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. So if you're at a school that is not required to take attendance, and you have a student who began the official withdrawal process, but your institution also has a way that a student can appeal their tuition charges, and in that process, they're required to document last date of attendance.
I think the microphone. Which date would you use?
Yes.
I'm trying to think. I think you're gonna use the earlier of whichever date of those 2 days.
Greg, wouldn't that, if the student noted the earlier date, wouldn't that be a student self-certification date, which we're not to use?
Well, you're going to have to, if the only thing you go on is the students, yeah, if the only thing you have is the student saying this is my last date, then you would have to use, if you can't verify that, you would have to use the date they begin the official notification, or a date that you can verify. Students are fun, aren't they? Yes.
Yes, I'm Brandy Massey from the North Carolina Community College System. And the question I have is, so in this scenario, it's just one Pell recalculation date for the term. It's not multiple with modules. If you do the initial calculation for a student very early on, let's just say March or April when you get their ISER, and then so your semester starts and your Pell recalculation date passed, so let's just face for fall, your Pell recalculation date was 8/30. But a student registers like for your late start classes that maybe start in October. So you did the initial calculation very early on, but they don't register until later. Are you allowed to pay that student since they registered after your Pell recalculation date?
You would have to use the initial, even though they registered later, you'd have to use that initial calculation
Okay.
back before they registered.
But if you had done their initial calculation after your Pell recon date,
Then you're going to use that after the,
your Pell recalculation
right,
date.
the one after.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, yes.
So our school has a form to start the formal withdrawal process where they want everyone to go through housing, IT, dean of students, but that is our formal process when they start that form. Sometimes it takes them 2 or 3 weeks to finish and get back in, and the registrar won't drop them until it's complete. So when they start that form, they sign it and put a date. And then when they complete the form, the registrar withdraws them. What would be the date of determination and what would be the withdrawal date? And if the student takes 40 days to turn it in, are we non-compliant because we're past due?
I have to go back and visit the slide always on this one. So the date of determination is going to be the date that they begin that.
They start it, right?
They start it.
So that means we have 30 days from then, and if they take 30 days to complete it, are
Right.
we instantly non-compliant?
Yes, technically.
Right. And then the withdrawal date would be whatever date the registrar determines within that process they ceased attendance.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
No, I don't think it does. I wish I had better answers. Yes.
We're beyond, when the situations where we're beyond, when we were doing the R2T4s and FAA access on IFAP, you could put in your date even though you were out of compliance. But now that it's moved to COD, if you're beyond the 30 days, you can't complete the R2T4 online.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be something. I'd bring up with the COD people and, well, yeah, I'm sorry, what? Yes. Yes, sir. And frankly, will the department make an adjustment for that? It appears not. Yes.
Okay, if a school is not otherwise required to take attendance, but for students who are on academic probation at the school, requirement is those students be tracked by their professors for attending class. It's still not a school required to take attendance, and those dates wouldn't have an impact if the student withdrew officially. Is that correct?
So for these students, they're on academic probation, and as part of that, you require attendance?
Yeah.
So for those students, it would be like they are required to take attendance. So you'd use attendance dates for them.
But it's not a program of students, it's just individual students who happen to be on probation.
I still think for that student, it is you're requiring them to take attendance. I think you would have to use the attendance date.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am.
That's okay. Our school does not require attendance. We have a student whose child was sick, got a doctor's note when their child was in the hospital. Everything happened after disbursements, but the teachers are saying the student never attended course. So would it be a retroactive drop and you use that drop date, or do you do a retroactive withdrawal based on the doctor's notes?
So could you say that again? I want to make sure I am understanding you properly.
We don't take attendance.
Okay.
Doctor's note is stated that the child was hospitalized after the disbursement of funds.
Mm-hmm.
Professors are stating the student never attended classes.
If they never attended classes, then they would not be eligible for any of the funds.
No, the teachers are saying they never attended.
But if they submit coursework, they're still participating.
Okay, thank you.
Oh,
And thank you.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, she's saying if they submitted coursework, then we would do by that date, correct? And then you're saying if they didn't, then we would go by the drop. They did not attend by what the professor stated.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that last part. So
If the professor's saying they didn't attend, I'm going to go by that. But if they're submitted coursework, then I would go by that date.
right, if they did submit something, then yeah,
So that would just be an additional question for the professors.
yes,
Thank you.
yes, sir.
I have 3 modules in a semester.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is 3 credits. Second one is 3 credits. Last one is 6 credits. The student starts, finishes, drops the second module with 3 credits. Do I need to do an R2T4 even though they're enrolled in 3 plus the future 6? Or am I good there?
So give me that one more time to make sure.
First is 3 credits.
3 credits, okay.
And they're actually sequential. Second module is 3 credits. Last module is 6 credits. The student goes 3 credits, drops out in the second module, drops the class, but still has the 6. Do I need to do an R2T4?
He still has the 6 for the whole.
He has 9. He has 6 in the future and 3 he passed.
If you can confirm the attendance that he's going to come back for the 3, then you don't have to do an R2T4.
So if I have intent that they're coming back,
Yeah, they have to say they're going to intent, and it's got to be something like in writing, something active, and if they come back, then you wouldn't have to do anything. Of course, if they don't come back, then you would have to do an R2T4.
So the period, if that period's longer than 14 days, it doesn't matter. That module, that middle module.
No, not that point. It does not,
Okay.
because you've got them certified. They're saying they're coming back.
They're coming back, right?
Yes.
And then at that point, if they don't come back, then I do the R2T4.
Right. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry.
She wants to know based on what date. So I guess it'd be the end date of the first module?
Yes. If they don't come back, yeah, that would be the date.
Thank you.
Yes.
Also for date of determination, it says in the regs when the school becomes aware, who do you constitute as the school? If they tell their RA they've stopped going to school, do we have to educate housing and student affairs and everyone that if someone tells you they don't go to school, you need to notify the registrar? Or is it our official office who certifies drop-in classes? Like if they come into my office and say, in the financial aid office and say, I'm going to withdrawal, I generally say, have you talked to the registrar? That's the place where you go to start the process. But do we have to use the date that they told me?
Yes, it would be the date they would tell you.
Does that apply to housing or student affairs or the health center? Because they're all part of the school.
Yeah, and technically it would. Excuse me? But if you're with your school, as your school policy, that to officially,
It has to be through the registrar.
Yeah, they need to notify, if they notify someone in that, I have to look at, in that process. Yeah, because this one also gets murky. I think it's if they, I'm gonna have to go back, let me look back there. So, okay, so it's the date they provide official notice, and it's in writing or orally to a designated school official in official capacity. And I suppose
It's that designated.
designated,
So if we say the only designated people are the registrar who
then
can
that would
formally
be,
withdraw
yeah.
you, then
Then I
would
think
be
your
the only
policy would be,
We just have to make sure that that is said in our policy.
yeah, I think that's what you would have to do, because we do say designated.
Okay.
And I think part of the reason is because, you know, they can tell their RA, and is their RA going to tell it? I mean,
That's what I was.
mine wouldn't have.
No. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
With regard to unofficial withdrawals, we are not required to take attendance, but often instructors will report the last date of attendance for an unofficial withdrawal. Are we okay to assume that if no last date of attendance is reported by the instructor, that they completed the class and earned the F and failed, or must we use the midpoint of the payment period?
If there's no last date of attendance and say they failed, if you don't have something that shows that they actually attended that last class or that they actually took an exam and failed, then at that point, if you can't figure out what an academically related activity is, you would have to use the midpoint. Yes.
In your presentation, I just want to confirm because I think in your presentation for direct loans, for loans, if it's a post-withdrawal disbursement, we need to notify and get that acceptance from the student to get that post-withdrawal disbursement. But Pell does not need any type of notification at all or whatsoever. Doesn't matter whether the student has a balance or not.
Right.
It's not a federal regulation.
Yeah, for Pell, for a grant, you can disperse, well, Pell would be the only one, you can disperse that directly to them.
With or without students'
With their
acceptance.
consent. For direct loans,
Must have.
yeah, they must.
Okay.
And then if they don't, you give them, if they don't come back within the time frame that you give them, you don't have to give them that loan if they come back after.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question on the Pell recalculation date.
Yes.
So if you have a 15-week term and then 2 7-week modules inside the term and you have Pell recalculation dates for each module, so if a student had the 15-week, a 7-week, and a second 7-week, we would be using the Pell recalculation date after the second 7-week start. If the student is eligible for Pell for that first 7-week or the 15-week, we still have to wait until that Pell recalculation date at the end of, after the second 7 weeks starts before we can disperse any Pell to the student. correct?
Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm a student that actually is enrolled in 6 credits, and they have a direct loan, it disperses, and then they drop within our drop add period down to 3. So now we don't charge them tuition for the whole 6 credits. But we are allowed to let them keep their direct loan because of the time of disbursement they were at 6 credits. Are we within our right to actually reduce their cost of attendance and then reduce that loan down to that cost of attendance? Mostly this happens like with grad students, like they'll have the larger loan and they have 6 credits, then they go down to 3, they're only charged for 3.
Generally, I think once it's disbursed, and even though they did drop, I mean, you can change your cost of attendance, but I would not reduce the loan. Let them stay where it is.
Thank you.
Excuse me?
Yes.
They're not R224 because they're still in school. Yes, sir.
Do you ever have a true initial Pell calculation before the student actually enrolls? So if we award in this month for next year, is that our true initial Pell calculation, or do we have to wait till they initiate enrollment for it to be initial Pell calculation?
No, you can do it before they enroll.
So can every student then have an initial Pell calculation of full time?
I'm sorry?
Can every student that you award before the semester have an initial Pell calculation of full time?
Yes. Well, at full time?
Yeah, because we always award, I mean, I'm sure everyone awards or whatever you call it now before the student enrolls.
I guess they could unless you know that they're not coming full time.
Okay.
Anything else? If not, I'll let you go early. I'll be at Ask a Fed, so you can ask me or any other Fed. And thank you for your time today and showing up, and especially after lunch. So have a good rest of the conference. Take care.